if he has taken over, he's a hardliner. He's not going to take over and surrender. So the missile strikes will continue.
As the war in Iran enters its 10th day, tensions in the region continue to escalate as Turkey, the UAE and Qatar all claim to have intercepted Iranian missiles today. Updating the Commons earlier, the Defence Secretary John Healey defended his government's response to the conflict and outlined what role British forces are playing in the region.
Our F-35s destroying Iranian drones over Jordan. Our Typhoons shooting down targets heading to Qatar. Our counter-drone units defeating further attacks against coalition bases in Iraq. We acted early to protect British people and British interests and to support our allies.
Well, meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned that US-Israeli strikes on Iran's oil facilities are contaminating the country's food, water and air. And in the last 24 hours, the Islamic Republic announced who would succeed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, his son Mujtaba Khamenei. Well, joining us now from Iraq is the Times correspondent Richard Spencer. Evening, Richard.
Good evening.
Let's look at what we have learnt from today, really. Iran is continuing to pummel neighbouring countries, and Turkey, through NATO air defences, has intercepted a missile from Iran again today.
Yeah, there's no sign that Iran is giving up, surrendering unconditionally or otherwise, as Trump has demanded. As you say, they elected a new supreme leader last night, the son of the old supreme leader, which is very much a sort of throwing down the gauntlet, if you like, to Trump, because Trump had said that wouldn't be acceptable. It's not quite clear where he is, or if indeed he is in a fit state to take over. There have been rumours that he's been injured in a missile strike. His wife was killed at the same time as his father, Ayatollah Khamenei. So we're not sure really what the state of that is. But if he has taken over, he's a hardliner. He's not going to take over and surrender. So the missile strikes will continue. They are not going at the same pace as they were last week. There are signs that the regime's defences are splintered. Perhaps deliberately. There was clearly orders to decentralise sort of command and control, just because of the threat of the high command being wiped out. But as you say, there were missiles shot today at Israel. Cluster munitions killed someone in Israel, and that significant incident in Turkey, which has not been a huge target, but which does have the enormous US base at Incirlik, one of the most important bases in NATO. And a missile heading into Turkey in that general direction was taken out by NATO defences.
OK, let's talk about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. This has caused oil to head up to nearly $120 a barrel overnight. It's come down a little bit since then. But the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz is pretty much paralysed. The Gulf states are filling their reserves up and will not soon be able to take much more. I think this will bite Donald Trump sooner or later. It's certainly being discussed as a wider problem of this conflict. Has there been any update today at all? I know that at one point, Richard, the suggestion from Donald Trump was that US warships might escort oil tankers down the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, I think that has been dismissed as unlikely, and it's unclear whether tanker owners would take the risk of going through the strait even with an escort, because they have to consider things like insurance, as well as the threat of a ship being actually sunk with the crew on board and so on. But I do think there will be assessments made later on as this proceeds, and it's clearly going to proceed for at least another couple of weeks. I would argue, judging from the way people are talking and the sort of targets that have been taken out. They may well have a look and see what sort of forces they think the Iranians can bear. Now, they claim to have sunk much of the Iranian navy, but the Revolutionary Guard has its own speedboats which can attack tankers. And of course, they can fire missiles at the tankers from the shore if they still have those missile stocks available. So that's a pretty risky idea at the moment, and I don't think anyone seriously thinks that's going to happen anytime soon. But later on, if this does go on for a long time, that might be something they will be forced to consider. I mean, there are other options. There's the release of reserves from America and European reserves. That will keep things going for a while. China has been building up a massive oil reserve in recent years. It is also rumored to have done its own deal with Iran to allow its oil through. I mean, it's a diplomatic backer of Iran, and one or two Chinese tankers have been seen slipping through the strait. Or having slipped through the strait, I should say. They turn off their transponders as they go. So there is wiggle room here. But 20% of the world's oil does go through the strait, so it's not inconsiderable.
And tell me a little bit about where you are, Richard. We discussed last week on the show the suggestion that Kurds originally from Iran living in Iraq might be encouraged to get involved in this war, that the CIA was arming them, not with heavy weaponry, but was arming them nonetheless. And there were a couple of move-ons over the weekend. Tehran threatening massive attacks on Friday on Iraqi Kurds if they help the Iranian Kurds attack. Trump then said he'd ruled out having Kurds join the war. He says they're willing, but the war's complicated enough. And the Kurds themselves in Iraq ruling it out. There was a letter from the office of the First Lady of Iraq just saying, look, we've effectively been bitten on this before. She references Iraq in 1991 and the Kurds being encouraged to rise up against Saddam Hussein, and just says, we're not interested, simply. I know you've been in Iraq, in a Kurdish area, I understand. Just tell us what you've been hearing.
Yeah, well, I'm here now, and I went and interviewed some of these. I have been interviewing some of these Kurdish Iranian groups, and spoke to a couple of fighters yesterday who are very keen to go and take on the regime. They were a couple of guys from one of the 5 or 6 groups that have banded together and say they will take on the regime, and if America supports them, they would be the tip of the spear. These are guys who really hate the regime and have left Iran and are part of guerrilla organizations. Some of these organizations do have guerrilla arms still in Iran, occasionally staging attacks against regime targets. Now, the question of whether America will or won't support them. I mean, they have denied, all these groups have denied that they've had any support so far in terms of arms and so on. They've also denied reports that they've already gone over the border into Iran. But they are saying that if there were a sustained operation by America that took them into account, they would be very happy to participate. What they don't really have is any heavy weaponry or any great numbers, probably a few thousand at most altogether. So if they went in on their own, it would be a suicide mission. But as part of a sustained operation, if Trump does eventually send ground troops, I think they'd be interested. And there's no love for the regime in the Kurdish parts of Iran, and they do make up to around 10%, possibly even more, of the Iranian population. Yeah,
the suggestion, or one of the suggestions we had last week, was that the Kurds could be asked to protect a certain area of Iran that then something more significant could be launched from. So if US boots did go onto the ground, that the Kurds would effectively protect a base for them in Iran, and then be able to sort of provide cover and protection for them to a certain extent. But it's still very unclear. We'll leave it there for time, but it's always fascinating to speak to you, Richard. Thank you so much for being with us. Richard Spencer there, who is the Times correspondent. He's in Iraq at the moment. There's always so much to learn from Richard. Do read his work online at thetimes.com and, of course, in the paper on a daily basis.